First, how do you stress the mitochondria? Intense workout, a walk longer than you normally do, EMF radiation, pollution, smoking, drinking, even maybe it's just a stressful email or a stressful conversation with a loved one. Then you stress your mitochondria. It has to produce more energy to support the cell. And now you've got more reactive oxygen species than the glutathione and melatonin can manage. That's where this ESS60 molecule steps in. It can hold on to those reactive oxygen species so they can't run around like little bumper cars and do damage. And then when that mitochondria gets back to homeostasis and replenishes the glutathione and the melatonin, now it can grab onto those reactive oxygen species and manage them properly.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Before we go into the molecule, that is very fascinating. I have to ask you a very important question. How'd you get into comedy and improv?
There'll be a couple moments. I wrote a book, and there's a couple moments in this book where my forward thought is, I have some value to offer here, right? And then my secondary thought is like, oh, that was a little cocky. And that certainly fits into this particular story. So my wife had a little sister in Big Brothers Big Sisters. It's a program, you're probably familiar with it. And they had events, like there's different places, different companies around the city of Houston will actually sponsor events so that the bigs and littles can get together and do stuff, right? Like this is pretty fantastic. There's an improv, really a comedy, a theater that did improv literally up the road from my office here. And one day my wife was going and she was like, oh, we're going to bounce around ideas, things that we could do, good for Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Do you want to come? And in my, braggadocious mind, it was like, I have value to add here. So I went to this event. Right. And then it was good. I doubt that I actually added much value in that particular day, but they were having a free course that Friday or Saturday. I think it was probably Saturday for an improv. Hey, come take a free course, and then if you like it, you sign up. So I went and did the free course. I really liked it, and so I signed up. Finished the first season, and at the end of your class, the graduation ceremony is you convince your friends to pay $5 to come watch you do comedy improv, right? And then now you're doing comedy improv in front of your friends who have now just invested $5 in the experience. And I remember the very beginning. It was the first scene, right? So this is comedy improv, not stand-up comedy. This is, you got two actors on, it's whose line is it anyway, right? You got two actors on stage. They have some rules. The audience gives them a location and relationship. And I remember as I started, we were two wrestlers in a cemetery, professional wrestlers. And I just thought, if I'm going to do anything, it's just going to be super big. And so I just started off, and I felt the long hair, right, from these professional wrestlers. And I was like, I love being in the cemetery. And that set the stage for just, going all into this kind of adventure. At the end of it, people who were also performing with us who were in the advanced class was like, how long have you been doing this? It was like literally first time on stage. Like I was a theater rat, in high school. This is first time on stage. I went and took the class again because it was cheaper. Actually, you get a 50% discount taking the same class again. So I didn't go to the next class, and they were starting a troupe, and they invited me to join the troupe. And I absolutely loved it. It is, I could have the toughest week at the office here and then head over there. And it is a lot of people think like it must be exhausting. And it's really the opposite of exhausting, because you have to let go of everything that's in your head. Your only job is to make that other person look brilliant. That's all you have to do. You make them look brilliant, and it's their job to make you look brilliant. And so you're on stage just having a lot of fun. And just to kind of wrap this up, how did I go from taking one improv course to being a professional improv artist for 5 years? One time my mom attended, and I was like, hey, what did you think? Like, this is kind of fun, right? And she goes, well, it felt exactly like sitting around the dinner table as I was growing up. we would take words and you'd flip them and maybe the double entendre, and then it would, get scatological, get disgusting, and then you'd clean it up. Like this is what we did as a family around the table. And, I didn't know that was improv, and that set the stage for me to be able to do it on stage professionally, which was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's ironic that we're even having this conversation about improv, because this was actually recommended to me recently by a gentleman for me to do it. And I didn't realize so many different entrepreneurs and CEOs do improv, and they keep saying it makes you a better speaker and just a better communicator. And a lot of times it gets you out of your shell if you're a person who's closed off. So I think I have an idea of what your answer is going to be, but I'm curious, what do you think is the biggest benefit from doing improv?
I think there's a number of them. I think anytime you're at a very core level analyzing how you speak, the words that you use, you will get better, right? Because it's so easy to just go through life and have words come out of your mouth, and maybe you're good at it, maybe you're kind of good at it, maybe you suck at it, and like you might not even know. But as you start to there's a little bit of irony in there, because I started that sentence with but, and I'm about to talk about how important not using the word but is. As you start to analyze the words you use and the way you speak and intonation, you get better at it. Like you come to understand, oh, I could do it a better way, and it's slightly better. So the first rule of improv is called yes and you can think about it in terms of, if I say, hey, I like your jacket, but okay, now it doesn't matter that I like your jacket, right? Like I've just stopped the interaction. I've created it as a negative. And if I can say the exact same thing and say, I like your jacket, and, if it had a stripe on it, that'd be kind of, now I still like your jacket, right? And I'm saying, hey, we could add to it, and this might make it better, right? Totally different. The whole experience. One is building bridges. One is like literally chopping the bridge in half. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. And as you start to go through your day and try and remove the word but from your vocabulary, it causes you to get deep into understanding how you're speaking and also how you speak to others. And I know, my first thought was, well, if I have some employee come up to me with this really like boneheaded bad idea, how do I yes and that? And the reality is you can. You can say, yes, that's really interesting. There are a couple reasons that we might want to tweak your idea. Is very different than yes, but it's a bad idea, or yes, but we have to take these in. Like just that one word really bridges the gap, right? And versus, chopping it in half. And that I think is really valuable.
Yeah, this is not a relationship podcast, but I feel like that's a very good relationship tool to use, and that would probably save a lot of couples.
Yeah, I think if you, I've been in different networking groups where I was like the education coordinator, and I've taught those rules. And I have people, that was probably 20 years ago, when I see them at networking events, like, this man changed my life with yes and like it really can. It really has that possibility, because again, anytime you're analyzing the way you communicate with people at that level, it's your communication is going to get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so let's go to your background a little more. And how in the world did you get to where you are right now, studying what you are studying right now?
Yeah. So it's been a pretty crazy journey. Even 10 years ago, if you had said to me, Chris, you are going to have written a book. Well, one, you're going to be in the health space. You're going to have written a book, Live Longer and Better. You're going to have done a longevity summit. Where I interviewed 55 experts in longevity, including some pretty heavy hitters like Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, Dr. Stephen Gundry. I probably would have just said no. I'm the kind of person who likes to set himself up for success, and I don't see how I'm going to go from there, from where I was to this position now. It really all started when I was in college. I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur, and that's kind of an interesting story. It's in my book, Live Longer and Better. I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur, and see, I just removed the word but from my sentence, because I'm like, I just talked about it. So now I got to remove the word but. I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. When I started going to college, my family, it was understood you go to college. We didn't, I graduated from high school. I hadn't applied anywhere, so it wasn't like a key focus. My dad got a job. I graduated from high school up in Ohio, outside of Dayton, Ohio. And my dad, who was previously in the Air Force and had retired at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, that's the biggest Air Force base in the country in Dayton, Ohio, he came down to Houston for a job. So I came down and applied to the University of Houston, who, by the way, just won second place NCAA. So I just confirmed that. Go Cougs. And so I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. And what does an entrepreneur study, right? Today, you might go into an entrepreneurship program. I'm not convinced that's what I would do. I think my line of thinking was really solid. I was like, I happen to be good in math. I happen to be good in science. What is the fastest way to the highest salary so I will have money to invest in a company? So I studied mechanical engineering at the University of Houston, and a couple things went awry with that. First off, I started a company before I even got out of college, and I started that company with my business partner, Robert Wong. And we'll talk about what we do, but well, let's talk a little bit about this molecule, because that kind of sets the stage. So I'm actually holding up a model of a molecule. If you're listening, just imagine a soccer ball where the lines on the soccer ball represent the bonds between the carbon atoms. So you have a spherical molecule of 60 carbon atoms. We call this molecule ESS60, stands for elemental safe spheres with 60 atoms. The molecule was discovered in 1985, actually here in Houston at Rice University. And the three scientists who discovered the molecule won the Nobel Prize for that discovery in 1996. So a short 11 years from discovery to being awarded the Nobel Prize. This is because it was in Houston, at the University of Houston campus, so not at the Rice campus, but at the University of Houston campus, there was a superconductivity center. It's called the Texas Center for Superconductivity. And it's an organization housed inside of the University of Houston campus. And we on campus just called it Chu's Castle, because Dr. Paul Chu was the reason this building existed. My business partner was actually working in a lab in Texas Center for Superconductivity, separating this molecule. Actually, the molecule, and when it was discovered with a bunch of other molecules, 60 atoms, 70 atoms, 74 atoms, 84 atoms, 76 actually. And he was separating those molecules from each other. It turns out that this ESS60 molecule has some superconductivity features to it, characteristics. So one day, Dr. Paul Chu comes in and says to my business partner, Robert, hey, you guys are a bunch of young guys. This molecule is selling for $6,000 a gram. You should go start a company making this. And Robert comes from an entrepreneurial background. And I describe it as a back of the napkin calculation, which probably just looked like $6,000 a gram. It's such a massive amount of money per gram. And he was off and running to start a company to manufacture this molecule. They brought me in because I'm studying mechanical engineering. They needed drawings. They needed design. It turns out this molecule is extremely challenging to manufacture. And that's when we ended up starting the company. I was supposed to go away. There was another business partner who Robert and I are still really good friends with him, and he's very successful. But in college, he wanted to have more fun college experiences, and Robert and I were just focused on growing a business and doing some spectacular things with the business. Now, this molecule, talk a little bit more about it, is amazing. It performs as well or better than the current best material in almost every application. So it makes better ink, better batteries, better tires, better photocells. And this is where people usually get nervous. It was like, he's in the health space. He just said ink, batteries, tires. I've literally never woken up, looked at my car battery and thought, what component of my car battery should I be taking every day for health and longevity? And the story actually gets a little worse. One of the shapes on the exterior of this ESS60 molecule is the same shape as benzene. Benzene is ubiquitous in our society. We don't have modern society without benzene. If you don't believe me, just imagine everything around you that's plastic, gone, because the foundational molecule is the benzene ring. It's also in many medicines, including aspirin, right? And many detergents. We don't have modern society without the benzene ring. And when the benzene ring is on its own, it is known to be toxic and known to be carcinogenic. So they thought this ESS60 molecule, soccer ball shaped molecule, would be toxic. They put it in a toxicity study. Instead of being toxic, the test subjects that they gave it to, in this case, it was Wistar rats, lived 90% longer than the control group. So that's the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history. It's peer-reviewed, published research, and my lab, very proud to say, my lab provided the material. My lab is mentioned in that original study. So that is how I ended up here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think some listeners might have heard of carbon 60, right?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
And when people, I just love to interject here. When people say, oh, is that carbon 60? I say, I couldn't be more proud that you've heard of carbon 60. My business partner and I are the oldest and longest manufacturers and distributor of the molecule on the planet. And when people in the carbon 60 space, usually talking about health benefits, are talking about those health benefits, they're referring the paper that I just mentioned, where the rats live 90% longer. My lab provided the material, and my lab is mentioned in that study. It is not grandiose to say you would have not heard of C60 if it wasn't for us.
Okay. What's the difference if someone says, what's the difference between C60 and ESS60?
Yeah, let me think about the best way. Let me share a little bit more of my story, and I think then I can frame that if that's okay. So
absolutely.
So this study where the rats live 90% longer comes out, and the rats have lived 90% longer. It comes out in mid-2012. Mid-2013, we start getting phone calls from this crazy, wacky group of people called biohackers, right? I can say that because I am now a biohacker. I can say that affectionately. And they're like, you should consume this. How much of this should I consume? And we're like, wait a minute. This is stuff that we sell to research institutions around the world to put into ink, batteries, tires, and photocells. I think you should consume none of this. We actually added not for human consumption to our labeling in mid-2013. So you think from 1991 all the way to mid-2013, we don't have not for human consumption on the labeling because that's not a concern. Now it's a concern. And by the way, when we put not for human consumption on the labeling, it was clear in the literature that this molecule was safe, right? Like, in fact, it extended the life of these test subjects by 90%. As we go through, we're getting 2 to 3 phone calls per week of crazy, wacky biohackers saying things like, hey, my knee pain is gone. And we're like, wait, you mean the knee pain of your rat? What, right? Because it says not for human consumption on the label. And they're like, yeah. Hey, if my rat weighs 275 pounds and he does HIIT training on Tuesdays and Thursdays, how much should my rat be taking? Right. So we kind of know what's going on here. And every quarter, my business partner and I are getting together and deciding, hey, do we want to get into this industry? And I think it's generous to say that the supplement industry is challenged, right? In fact, I found a paper this started happening in mid-2013. We really started bringing the product to market at the end of 2017. In that time frame, I found a paper where the researchers, the supplements they had purchased, this is peer-reviewed published research, only 50% of the supplements they purchased had in them what they said they had in them, right? So this is a challenged industry, very different than delivering commercial quantities of carbon nanomaterials to research institutions, because they immediately test it. They make sure that we shipped them what we promised them. And like the standards are just night and day. So every quarter we'd get together. We're like, no, we don't want to get in this industry. Finally, at the latter part of 2017, a guy with a big YouTube following starts talking about all the benefits he's getting, taking it on a daily basis. And our phone went from ringing 2 to 3 times a week to ringing 10 times a day. So now it's a bigger entrepreneurial opportunity than we realized. And one of our first thoughts was, hey, think about that paper where 50% of the supplements on the market don't have in them what they say they have in them. Think about that. That's going to happen to this C60 industry, right? We're in a unique position. We've been working with the molecule for 34 years. We have the lab. We have the test equipment. We have the knowledge. We have the know-how. We have the expertise to really deliver a high-quality product. And that kind of twisted our arm to get into the industry. What happened, like pretty quickly, we tested 22 of the products in the C60 space. and they were woefully low in concentration. By the way, that's no surprise, because remember that paper, 50% of the supplements on the market don't have in them what they say they have in them. At this point, even today, because of the job that I need to be doing better, almost no one's heard of C60. You go to a biohacking space conference, which is a target-rich environment, it's about 30% of people. If you go to the general population, it's about 99% of people have not heard of this molecule. And if I'm going to teach people about a molecule, then I want to put them in a safe space, right? And right now in the C60 space, woefully low in concentrations, there are actually 3 products with no C60 in them, like none, 0 C60 that are marketed as C60. And 2 of them are actually different molecules that have absolutely 0 toxicity data in them. So if I just talk about C60, people are going to go onto Amazon, even if I kind of tell them like there's a better solution, and Amazon reviews don't count for anything when they talk about a supplement. They're going to go onto Amazon, they're going to buy potentially these 3 products, one of these 3 products. 2 of them don't have any toxicity data. The other one doesn't have any C60 in it, and they're going to have a bad experience. They're like, oh, I tried that C60 stuff, it doesn't work. We also think of it in terms of this. C60 is for industrial applications, right? Inks, batteries, tires, photocells. And there's peer-reviewed published research that proves if you process it improperly, it's harmful. ESS60 is C60 that's been processed for people and pets.
Ah, okay. Okay. Easy to understand now. Just out of curiosity, those products that don't have that in it, what's actually in there then?
I believe so. I'll go through 3 of them. One of them, it's c-60.com. When you get it, it's in sunflower seed oil, arguably not the best oil, and it is black. And if C60 dissolves in an oil, it would not be black. It would be in a clear oil. It's actually a beautiful purple color in olive oil, because olive oil already has kind of a green hue. You put purple and green together, you get this kind of murky amber color. It's black because of some sort of soot. And I think he's probably fired up some equipment. He's not running it properly, and he's got this soot. He's not processing it. It has 0 C60 in it. The next one is supercharged C60. And on there, so hey, what are the benefits of C60? They reference all the literature, all the great papers on all the benefits. And then they actually say it's nano onions, right? So you can imagine this soccer ball shaped molecule, and then you can imagine another layer, right? And then another layer on top, and then you cut it. Now you have a nano onion. Great in motor oil. Like I know companies that have sold tons of this stuff into motor oil. But it is not C60, right? There may be some molecules, some in there that have 60 atoms, but it is not C60, and there is 0 toxicity data. It is not morally right to sell that product at this point. And certainly you shouldn't be associating it with C60, because it's not. That's just unethical, in my opinion.
Yeah, it does. Okay. So yeah. Go ahead, finish.
And then there's one more. There's a water-soluble product that's on the market. You take a couple OH molecules, you attach them to the exterior of this cage, and now it's water-soluble. There is, again, 0 toxicity studies on water-soluble. In fact, the biggest kind of water-soluble company out there, he was on stage one point. I went into the talk. I was like, don't say anything, because it shouldn't be on the market, right? There's no toxicity studies. At the end, it came to Q&A. I couldn't resist. I said, hey, you're saying that this water-soluble C60 is naturally occurring. I'm aware of ESS60 or C60 being naturally occurring. Where is the water soluble naturally occurring? And he says, well, we took OH, which is naturally occurring, and we took carbon 60, which is naturally occurring, and we put them together, and so it's naturally occurring. And I was like, no, that's a different molecule, right? Like, if that's true, then every molecule is naturally occurring, right? Because you're only ever taking natural atoms and putting with other natural atoms. And he goes, oh, we're just arguing semantics. And I said, we're not arguing semantics. We're actually arguing chemistry. That's the type of leadership that is in the space. And again, if you go back to that paper, 50% of the supplements on the market don't have in them what they say they have in them. This is not really a surprise. And that's really why I'm an advocate for people being safe when they're buying supplements in general, because this is not the only industry where this is happening. And then that's why I talk about ESS60 typically.
Okay, so let's look into the mechanism a little bit. And so correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been known to be wrong a lot. And so to my understanding, it's going to act like an antioxidant. And so maybe someone's going to say, okay, what makes this different compared to other antioxidants like a glutathione or even a vitamin C?
Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned glutathione specifically, because the mechanism of action, our current theory, is what we call the BOSS theory, buffering oxidative stress system. I'm going to get a little geeky, and then I've got a fun kind of analogy to wrap this all together. We know from peer-reviewed published research that the ESS60 molecule gets into the mitochondria. We also know from way back in the 90s when this was discovered that this molecule can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles on the exterior of this cage. And here's where this plays out. Let's talk a little bit about the mechanisms of the mitochondria. It is the powerhouse of every cell. In every cell in your body, there's between 50 and 5,000 mitochondria, except for blood cells, which have 0, and brain and neurons, which actually have 2 million. That's how much our nervous system uses relative to our other systems. Like every power source we are familiar with, there are negative byproducts. In the case of mitochondria, it's reactive oxygen species. You can think about your car going down the road. You've got exhaust. You can think about a power plant, right? It's got a smokestack and smoke coming out of it. Again, in the mitochondria, it's reactive oxygen species. These are negatively charged particles. And the way I describe them, they're like little bumper cars. If you just leave them on their own, they're going to run around and rust everything that they bump into. They're causing oxidative stress, oxidative damage. So for a normal mitochondria, you have glutathione, which you mentioned, and melatonin as internal resident antioxidants to manage these reactive oxygen species. It's interesting that melatonin, our most consistent testimonial, is that people take the product in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night. There's melatonin right in this, in this theory, nice parallel. So a mitochondria that's not stressed is producing energy for the cell. It's producing reactive oxygen species, and they are managed by the glutathione and melatonin. But what happens when you stress a mitochondria? First, how do you stress a mitochondria? Intense workout, a walk longer than you normally do, EMF radiation, pollution, smoking, drinking, even maybe it's just a stressful email or a stressful conversation with a loved one. Then you stress your mitochondria. It has to produce more energy to support the cell. And now you've got more reactive oxygen species than the glutathione and melatonin can manage. That's where this ESS60 molecule steps in. It can hold on to those reactive oxygen species so they can't run around like little bumper cars and do damage. And then when that mitochondria gets back to homeostasis and replenishes the glutathione and the melatonin, now it can grab onto those reactive oxygen species and manage them properly. Again, that's why we say this ESS60 molecule is the boss. My fun analogy, so like all biological analogies, should start with Mardi Gras, right? It's the end of Mardi Gras. You have these drunk reactive oxygen species running around, smashing windows, spray painting stuff. And you've got the New Orleans Police Department, the glutathione and the melatonin coming in and handcuffing themselves to those reactive oxygen species and getting them off of Bourbon Street. But what does the New Orleans Police Department do when they're overwhelmed? They take those reactive oxygen species and they stick them in a paddy wagon. They attach them to the exterior of this ESS60 cage so that they can't do any damage. And then when they replenish the glutathione and the melatonin, then they can come in and handcuff themselves to these reactive oxygen species and get them off of Bourbon Street. And again, that's why we say that the ESS60 molecule is the boss of buffering oxidative stress system. Now, if you reduce the negative impact of stressed mitochondria. By the way, you have stressed mitochondria if you're alive in this modern era. If you reduce the negative impact, then you are going to have head-to-toe testimonials, which in fact we have head-to-toe testimonials.
Okay, so let's move to inflammation. So would ESS60 directly work on inflammation, or would it indirectly maybe assist in helping reduce inflammation?
So I have to be really careful when talking about inflammation, right? So the FDA has equated discussions about inflammation with discussions about the diseases of inflammation, which are also the diseases of aging. So arthritis, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, cancer. So if I say we address inflammation, what the FDA hears is we cure cancer and arthritis and cardiovascular disease. So that is something that we cannot say. What we can say, what the FDA allows us to say, is that we address inflammation as it relates to exercise-induced inflammation, right? So we've all had a tough workout, maybe just walked farther than we normally do, and woken up that next day and felt that inflammation in our bodies. We absolutely can say that we address that type of inflammation. Now I'm going to share something. Literally, I recorded a video yesterday because we got a whole bunch of test kits in because we're doing an ad hoc study on a particular marker called HSCRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein. This is an inflammatory marker. So people who are tending to go are fighting cancer, who have cardiovascular disease, that's actually the big place that they tend to look at this marker, have elevated levels of HSCRP. At the last A4M, so this is the American Academy of Anti-Aging. They have an event called Longevity Fest. We had a booth. This Dr. Young comes up to me and shares this with me. I actually recorded a video because it was so profound. He said, Chris, I don't care if you're male, female, pre-surgery, if you're cardiovascular disease, diabetic, even healthy. If you've got elevated levels of HSCRP, your product, so MyVitalC, drops it into normal range in 4 to 8 weeks. So we're actually in the process of doing, he also went on to say, in terms of HRV, so that's your heart rate variability, a very good indication of kind of how you can manage stress and what your stress, where you are with stress. So your HRV and your sleep improvements from 20 to 60% in both of those. He actually said they're going to keep the product in their break room because all employees should have access to it. Pretty profound. So we just are in the process of doing an ad hoc study where we'll get these kits and the product to people, and we'll see what happens. If we can kind of confirm his results, then we're going to go directly into a placebo-controlled double-blind study to really kind of cement that piece of data.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The type of verbiage you have to use with the FDA, and then laws are always changing and everything. So it's a lot of mental, and I think it's unnecessary mental agility that you have to do, right? Because
so I got to share. I disagree, and here's why, right?
Okay.
Because your premise is right, and we actually have to be very careful sharing testimonials, and I think the general population intuition is like, well, if this happened, right? If Julian experienced this, why can't he share it on their website? Because when you read that testimonial, let's just say reduced inflammation for me, right? And I post that on my website. When somebody reads it on their website, they're like saying, this does that as a fact, right? They're not saying, oh, this is a one-off case and, maybe it doesn't apply to me, right? So it's something that I can articulate in our conversation. They're saying this does that. And inflammation is such a broad and is an indicator of so many diseases that if if they relax that rule, everybody would be claiming that they, like, what is the marker that you're using? Like everybody would be making those claims. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, everything cures cancer and everything cures Alzheimer's because they've made that kind of association. So I think, at least they get stuff wrong. Like there's no, if, ands, or buts about it. The FDA gets stuff wrong. But in this particular case, I think it is the right strategy because otherwise everyone's saying inflammation and otherwise everybody, is thinking that any product that's on the market is going to do these good things.
So I suppose then I guess it's almost like when you see these alternate therapies and treatments, right? And maybe they work with about 7 people. You see 7 cases, right? And then they start to really get that out there and say, hey, this is what I did to cure this, right? And there's not really a lot of, I guess, evidence behind that. And maybe it can do more harm because there's probably a lot of unknown variables that play a part in that you don't know. So therefore, so I see that point right there.
It's prudent it's the prudent decision until you actually have good data. So even after, because I believe we're going to be very successful with this HSCRP double-blind placebo-controlled study. I think we're going to get to that and we'll do it. And I think it'll have very good results. Even with that, we can speak about HSCRP, but you kind of need a medical expert to come in and say, well, that's actually valuable for these reasons, right? Here are the reasons that that's valuable. And maybe it's not a valuable indicator if you're diabetic, right? But it is a valuable indicator potentially if you have cancer, potentially if you have cardiovascular disease. And so those are that's where we'll be able to market and share that we reduce HSCRP into normal ranges. But how you interpret that, even we're not going to be able to say that. Like, we're going to have to be very careful. In fact, let me give my FDA disclaimer. The FDA has not evaluated our product. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, or prevent any disease. And so we'll still have to be careful, but it does open the door because a lot of healthcare practitioners are very aware of the importance of getting HSCRP values into normal range, which is below 1.
Yeah, you mentioned that individuals took it in the morning. Would you get a lot of benefit at taking it at night as well?
So I love to share this. There's a longevity expert and bodybuilder, and he's got a product on the market called Unmatched. His name is Chris Gethin. He has about 700,000 followers on Instagram, so super influential. And I actually was at a retreat this last weekend, and he was one of the presenters. And I couldn't be more proud that MyVitalC was mentioned on 3 of his slides. So one of them is, just from the context, like, antioxidants are good. Too many antioxidants are bad, unless you have a selective antioxidant like MyVitalC, right? We're a selective antioxidant where we're going after the reactive oxygen species that can cause damage, and we're leaving the other oxidative agents that actually are valuable, that actually do signaling, that are actually keep your system in homeostasis, or tell your system, hey, we're not in homeostasis. We need to be taking action here. We need some mitogenesis. So we need to create more mitochondria, whatever it may be. Our molecule allows that. And then on his kind of daily meal plan, he actually had, MyVitalC in the morning and then MyVitalC at night. The reason we typically say to take the product in the morning is we have a small percentage of customers, I would put it in the 3 to 5% range, who say if they take the product later in the day, that it can interrupt their sleep, right? Because you get this focus and energy. I think what's really happening is they are getting this focus and they do have this energy. And it's enough for them to think that they won't be able to fall asleep, so they don't really try. And if they had just let their head hit the pillow, they would have gone to sleep. Because I know when I'm going to bed, I'm good. I'm wired. I could stay up. I could do more. I'm certainly very clear how important sleep is. So I'm going to sleep. And then my head hits the pillow and I fall asleep, right? And then I wake up to pee in the middle of the night. My brain is alive. I could get up and do some work if I wanted to. But as soon as my head hits the pillow, I fall asleep. So just as a kind of precautionary, we'll do that. I'll also say for anybody who's had a tough workout and you didn't take it in the morning, I would feel very comfortable. Like, you're going to sleep well anyway. This, I believe, will enhance your sleep. And then we also have people, if they're drinking alcohol, report positive impacts if they take the product, and if you're drinking a lot, like, you might take your normal dose in the morning, you might take one. If you're going to go out and have a bunch of drinks with the friends, you might take a little capsule. We have these little capsules that we sell them in ampule. Have one in the middle, have one when you get home, and then get back to your normal dosing. And the reports on alcohol consumption and how people feel are just phenomenal.
That's interesting. I guess you can't say. Let's see, how would I put this? Helping with potential hangovers.
So it's interesting because our first product description right now, it's party recovery. We have some different boxes. It was originally hangover recovery, and then I found out that the FDA frowns upon that, so we fixed it. FDA didn't tell us. I just kind of was doing research. Actually, I think I had a conversation with somebody, and part of you, if you're like me, is like, how in the world would the FDA be concerned about hangover? This is something that you do to yourself, right? Like they should just stay out of it. Like it's our business. And then I'm going to say 2 words, and you go, oh, that's why it's the FDA's responsibility, and that is alcohol poisoning. Right? A hangover is alcohol poisoning. And as soon as it's poisoning, that's in the purview of the FDA.
Yeah. What if you phrase that to people like, hey, you're going to alcohol poison yourself tonight? Yeah. You know, I mean,
yeah. Well, I think, what we have put together is a party recovery. Right.
Yeah.
And that could be, the stress that you might have as a parent taking your child to a party, because that can be exhausting. And, you do get focus and energy from our product. And then, of course, the more adult partying that occurs.
Yeah. I mean, but if I had to actually, that party recovery sounds good.
Yeah.
Right. It sounds good. So the name still goes well. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go to your book. How was the process of writing a book?
Whew. It's an interesting. So I knew that I wanted to write a book because I always feel two things. One is extremely selfish, that when you take the time to like put content down, to produce a podcast, because you do research for the podcast and maybe even do kind of post-processing for the podcast, you're actually kind of selfishly learning, right? Yes. And it's a great way to learn. And writing the book was a great way to kind of cement these ideas, especially the longevity ideas, in my head. The other is, I've just always felt, as you're learning, if you're in a position to, you should share with other people. So that's, I knew I wanted to write a book. I also know that I'm not an author and that it wasn't like this book wasn't going to happen on my own. So I was kind of in the search for a co-author. My co-author is Dr. Jerome Corsi. He's not just a New York Times bestselling author. He's a 2-time New York Times #1 bestselling author, right? So it's hard to get on that list. It's exponentially harder to get to the top position of that list. And he's done it twice. And I was I didn't know who he was. The team passed the conversation, like he called in, wanted to have a conversation with me, and we were having a great conversation. But it was one of those conversations like, I don't know where this is going, right? I don't know. Are we going to just maybe never talk again? Are we going to, have this great conversation and then, once a month we'll connect? Like, I just didn't have any idea where it was going. And then I quickly Googled him and realized that he was a 2-time New York Times #1 bestselling author. And again, in kind of my braggadocious head, I was like, oh, I know why we're talking. We're talking because you're going to be my co-author, right? So I suggested it to him. He was in it was just perfect timing, because honestly, I think he's busy right now. If I were to approach him today, it just wouldn't happen. And so it did happen. And then I, in my mind, was like, he's going to interview me. He's going to go watch a bunch of videos that I've done. And then he's going to write a book, and I'm going to read it. And I'm going to say, that's amazing. Let's, push it out there. And our first kind of meeting, he goes, so Chris, here's what I'm going to need you to do. I need you to write down all of your ideas that you want to put together in this book. And I was like, well, I guess I'm writing a book, right? And so then I just carved a couple hours per week, put down all these content. He did a great job of Turkey. If there's any sense of prose in the book, it's because of him. And the storyline was good. It was nice because at one point he's like, you actually tell a good story. And that felt really good, right? From a New York Times bestselling author. And then, we put it all together. I'll tell you, one of the hardest parts was actually recording the audio, which is done but not out yet, for the audiobook. And that was significantly harder here's how hard it was. I had a guy video me recording it, and then went back to him later and said, hey, is there going to be anything of value here? And it's like, no. If somebody were to watch this video, all they would be wondering is, why the hell can't you read your own book? Right? Because you just get stuck on words when you're reading it out loud, right? And you're trying to have some intonation, and it's a painful process. And I've had conversations with other authors who are equally surprised at how challenging it is to read their own book into a microphone. Like it's not trivial.
Interesting. It's very interesting. So you mentioned earlier that that you are a biohacker. What was what's the most exciting thing that has your interest right now in that world?
Yeah. So I mentioned a retreat that I went to. Is called the Metamorphosis in Tulum. It had Chris Gethin and Jay Campbell and Jeff Dabney. Jeff is is the lesser known of them, but is an amazing guide for cold plunges, amazing guide for breath work. He's actually a free diver. So, that's breath work kind of important when you're underwater. And so one of the talks, Jay Campbell is very much a peptide expert. And so he went through just all the peptides that he's aware of, that he's tried, what they can do, how they work. And there's one particular peptide, I would butcher the name, that I'm interested in trying. I've played around with what's called this is when I felt I officially earned the title of a biohacker, is when I was injecting myself with peptides, right? So I trust the site. I'm doing it myself. I trust where I purchase from. I trust a whole number of people. Even Natalie Dom is an amazing peptide expert, and she has a podcast called Longevity. An amazing human. And so that's the point where I'm like, I'm officially a biohacker. So I've played around with the kind of the best known peptide stack, which is BPC 157 and TB 500. They call it the Wolverine stack because you heal extremely rapidly on it. And then now I have this new one that's going to be kind of more focused on getting leaner, because I'm in good shape. I like where my musculature is. I just want to get leaner. And so this is something that I'm going to play around with.
You remember which one it is?
Yeah, I can look it up.
Does it start with the R?
Yes.
Retatrutide? Something like that.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Have you played around with that? Is that something that you're thinking about?
I haven't used that. I use BPC a handful of times. I just needed to use I used the oral because it was more of a gut. It was more of a gut issue.
Oh yeah. That is apparently supposed to be really good for the gut also.
Yeah, it's really good. I very stressful time period in life. Started having acid reflux of all things. I was like, this is weird. Like, what's going on?
Acid reflux is often low acid in your stomach. And because it's low, the little valve that's supposed to block off your esophagus stays open, and then you burp up. And the medical community's idea is like, oh, it's acidity is too, like, drop the acid, which is actually the wrong thing to do. I'm about to start taking HCl because my acidity level is a little bit low. We're going to deal with. I just recorded a podcast with Margaret Berry and Restorative Wellness, I think is her company. And so we did a GI map and a food sensitivity, and it was a fantastic result, right? I'm fairly optimized. Like, she's like, most people are a dumpster fire. You've got a couple things that could be tweaked. And one of them is I have Helicobacter, an elevated level of Helicobacter. That's the one that typically causes acid reflux, although I'm not experiencing it. And one of the ways to get rid of that is to increase the acidity of your stomach. So I'm actually going to it's kind of cool. I love this geeky stuff. I'm going to get some HCl, some pills that will increase my HCl. I take one per day for 3 days with each meal. And then if I don't feel kind of like an acid reflux response, then I up it to 2. And then for 3 days, and then I up it to 3. And once I hit a number, let's say I get to 4 and I feel a little warmth, just a little, then I back down to 3. I love that this whole titration process and understanding your body and listening to your body. I love that stuff. So I'm excited to start that protocol. I haven't even ordered the products yet, but excited to start it.
Yeah, I checked out Jay's books to learn a lot. And then, are you familiar with the bioregulators?
Yes, a little bit. I've had some conversations around bioregulators. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the next thing that I'm probably going to try a bunch of different ones, because they're different from the peptides in terms of like their whole thing's just really, to me, is just designed for homeostasis. And so to me, I think it's probably easier for the general public to get on board with bioregulators than actually the peptides. Because they're pills, and there's less margin for error. Like, the only thing that you can maybe get out of is money, right? That's the only thing. It's not like you can mess up the doses or anything like that. So I think in the future the regulators are probably going to bypass the peptides and everything in terms of popularity.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I also think something that came out of this and some conversations that I've been hearing lately is that microdosing with GLP-1 agonists
Hmm.
is probably going to become significantly more popular, right?
Hmm.
So it's not taking the full-on dose that's going to cause you to lose weight or kind of address diabetes. It's actually just microdosing to have positive impacts, and the impacts are kind of systemic for low dose GLP-1 agonists.
Yeah, I'll have to research that. I'm not as familiar with those. Probably one of the peptides I'm going to use soon is MOTC. Maybe
Mm,
I'm getting interested in that one. I've seen a lot of, so I run a lot and I lift a lot. So I guess some people use the word hybrid athlete now. I guess that's a
yeah,
word now. Yeah.
yeah.
And so I've seen a lot of endurance athletes use MOTC. And so just curious. Just I'm fairly optimized. And so for me, I think I'm interested in like what's the most amount of like how much can I beat up my body without compromising longevity? And so maybe like performance longevity. That's what interests me. So
So, are you familiar with Anthony Kunkel?
no, I haven't heard of it.
He is a two-time U.S. ultra running champion. He won a U.S.
Hmm.
championship at 50 miles and a U.S. championship at 50K, which is 62 miles.
Hmm.
He absolutely loves our product. And my conversation with him, the first conversation was just fantastic, right? He said, Chris, I was taking one serving. I didn't really notice anything. And then, like all good biohackers, he tripled the servings, which, by the way, is not good on many things. Like, so definitely don't want to do that with resveratrol. To call out one specific one, he tripled it. And when he tripled the dose, he's like, "Wow, I was blown away." I feel like it's the difference between somebody having running as a hobby and somebody having running as a career.
Hmm.
And the way he described it is he said, and he is a, not only is he just an amazing endurance athlete, right? Currently clocking like 200 miles a week in preparation in training for a race.
Oh man.
He's also an amazing biohacker. Like he cycles off and on. By the way, you would probably really like this. He's in Durango, Colorado. For minimal cost, you can go train with him, right? And it doesn't
Hmm.
mean you have to do exactly what he does or whatever, but he's got a stream that runs by the compound. So you go cold plunge in the stream. He's got red lights. He's got red lights around a treadmill. So he's got that. He's got access to all the products that different vendors are giving him. Certainly MyVitalC is there. So you might want to look into that, because that would be like, I have the intent to do it at some point. And my jogs are 2 miles, not 200 a week, right? So I'd have to run 100 times a week to get to where he is. So I'm not anywhere close to his. You're probably significantly closer. What he described is, he said, I don't believe that MyVitalC speeds recovery. I actually believe it prevents damage in the first place. The
Hmm.
reason he said it is on the last 5 miles of a 50-mile run, which is a phrase you don't hear very often, where strength and stability were previously a problem, they're just no longer a problem. And if you think about somebody stressing their mitochondria, that's Anthony, right? Like,
Hmm.
and now here's how we think it's working. This is kind of another analogy. Let's say you're a field, and stress is actually good, right? Like, you're stressing your body regularly, and then it's the hormetic response that builds muscle, that creates integrity, that helps your body kind of repair itself. So you think about a field where rain is the stress, right? So if it's, as long as it's raining, that's good. You actually want that. And then you actually want periods where you're not, right? Where it's not raining. So this is an ideal pasture. But if you were to think about really stressing your body as a stream of water coming down onto that field, that's actually going to drill a hole, right? It's going to make a hole in the field. And you think about this ESS60 molecule as a beaker that you can put between the field and the stream. So now the beaker's filling up. It's not spilling onto the field, so it's not causing damage. And you got to be careful, though, because if you just keep putting more stress in it, eventually it gets full, overflows, and goes back to doing damage on that pasture. But once that pouring stress ends, then you can actually have that glutathione and melatonin come in and clear out the beaker so it's prepared for that next level of stress. So you end up splaying the stress over. It doesn't impinge in one point. It ends up being more of that sprinkling that happens over time. And that makes sense, right? If he's saying that he doesn't need to recover because he's not doing damage, it's because it's acting in the way that we describe in that boss theory, where it's buffering the oxidative stress.
That sounds interesting, because a lot of times, anytime you're doing a longer distance like that, you're going to hit some type of wall. Yeah, and it sounds like that this is just kind of eliminating that, or mitigating it. Mitigating it.
Yeah. And that's not to say, hey, you're currently running 5 miles, take a little bit of MyVitalC and you can clock 50, right? Your body, what that stream of stress looks like is dependent on where you are and how much beyond where you are you're pushing yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what defines that stream. Is it a little trickle? Is it a full stream? Is it a freaking waterfall? Like, what does that look like? Is dependent on where you are. Like, have you trained up to that point, or are you just pushing yourself beyond that point?
Yeah. And plus, there's a lot of systems at play when you're running. It's not just your cardiovascular system. It's your, are you used to your feet being on the ground that long, moving? Yep. And there's so many different factors. Because for me, a lot of it's not like I get tired. For me, I didn't get tired. My body gave up.
Yeah, your body's like, man, we're done.
It's when the first time I hit a wall, like my legs just stopped. So I wasn't like out of breath, just my legs just stopped. So that was a very interesting thing. So how's your I guess as we get ready to wind down here, I'm curious, what about your how's your views on dietary strategies? Are you in particular to any type of way of eating or anything like that?
So I have a couple of beliefs. One, I'm not convinced that vegetarian, vegan, or carnivore, any one of those is the optimal diet. It's certainly not the optimal diet for everyone. I'm not even convinced that it's the optimal diet for any one person. I believe that these diets are amazing, or way of life, or whatever you want to call them, are absolutely amazing, because typically the person who's adopting it is getting off of the standard American diet, right? So it doesn't matter what you do. You could go and eat whatever, as long as it's not processed food with that's processed to the point that you can't recognize it, that's processed to the point that your body can't recognize it, that's got, poorly processed oils in it. So now your cell walls are getting made with inferior oils. Like, if you get off of that and you do something, you will be better, and you'll be dramatically better. And I can understand why, hey, I've tried all these things, and then you try vegetarianism or veganism or carnivore, and you're like, I'm blown away. This is the ideal diet for me for the rest of my life. I don't think for the rest of my life is accurate. I think there is balance, and variety is actually really important. The other thing that I've really cemented in my mind, really in the last probably 12 months, is the importance of protein. And we're seeing this, if you're, listening to different podcasts, YouTube channel, memes, whatever, we're talking about a significant increase in the amount of protein consumption. And I can tell you, I've added 5 pounds of muscle in the last 9 months with no change I've been working out the same way since 2020. And it's because I'm consuming enough protein. So you really, and this becomes, extremely important at about 35. So up until between 30 and 35, you're continually, we all know, like, we're sloughing off skin, right? That exact same process is happening everywhere in our body, except for our brain, right? So your muscles are regenerating, right? The cells are getting reprocessed. Your body's really good at taking the amino acids from your actual muscle tissue that's being broken down and using it to build more muscle until about 35. And then at 35, it kind of sucks at it. So that sounds horrible. Like, you're screwed because your body can no longer take advantage of this resource. And that's kind of true, except you can make up for it by getting enough protein, right? So by providing enough of the amino acids to rebuild those muscles. And so getting enough protein is just paramount, and lifting heavy things is paramount, which I was already doing kind of consistently. But that, in terms of diet, you've got to get enough protein, and it has to have the right mix. It's significantly easier to do it with carnivore, or, with eating animal products. But it can be done, and it can be done in vegetarian or veganism, right? I think the best protein there, I think, is hemp protein. I think it's not pea protein. I've heard a couple of things where pea protein is kind of the bastard child of protein. And people typically using pea protein are they're not doing a service to their customers, but you really need to be focused on how much protein you're consuming.
Yeah, I would agree that the protein thing is, and one, it helps people, feel full. And that's usually a common complaint. Helps people feel full, not overeat. And so I never had that problem because I've always had like a raging appetite.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and a high metabolism. Do you or you're just super active?
I've gotten more active. I've probably starting at 35, 34. I'm 38 now. I've gotten more active since I started to run. I started to run more in addition to the lifting and boxing and stuff. But I've been a decent activity level, but I feel better across the board at 38 than I did at 28. The only thing that's probably not as good is things like maybe shooting a basketball and things like that, because that's a specific skill. So I don't think I would be nearly as explosive in those kind of movements, because I don't train for those movements. But as far as like lab work and every other thing, I'm better now than I was 10 years ago.
Yeah, good. That's the right path to be on.
Yeah, I do miss being a little more. I kind of do miss some of those skills, but I can always go play if I wanted to. I just don't trust myself, where I think I'm going to be like, I'm going to go play ball, and there's no reason it should be super serious, right? You're not getting paid for it or anything. But in my head, I'm going to think, oh, I'm 21 again, and I'm going to be trying to play exactly the same way I was at 21, and I'm going to hurt myself.
I would think that you should set that as a goal.
Yeah.
And just be smart about, if you think about Anthony running 200 miles a week, like, you don't start running 200 miles a week, right? Like, he's been doing this for decades, right? You can build up to that where you have those explosive movements. I just had a call with a guy who trains baseball pitchers, and he was talking about how you can watch them slow down, right? From 25 to 35, their pitches slow down, and they start getting more nuanced with their, how they're throwing versus just like trying to drive it down the middle. Now, is that because it's smarter to have the variety of pitches, or is that because they can't throw as hard? I would argue that if you have your diet right, like, you can still throw hard. And so I think you could still get to that point. I played soccer. I played semi-professional soccer. I played soccer for 25 years. I loved the sport. But for me, the reason that it'd be interesting to get back into it, but the reason I don't is it's just a time suck, right? So Saturday's gone. Right? If I'm going to play soccer, if the game's on Saturday or on Sunday, it's, you're out there giving it your all, and you're kind of wrecked for the day. And that's part of the reason that I quit. I think that's also part of the reason that people start getting into endurance sports at 35, because time is important, right? Maybe you've got kids, so Saturday and Sunday are now more important, and you can train at any point, right? Like, whether it's the morning, afternoon, like, you can go out and do some sort of training, and you've got a lot more flexibility in schedule with it.
Yeah, these things do take time, and I think that's something that, but I think everything takes time, and it's about priorities, and because the runs those are 3-4 hours. For Anthony, it's going to be much longer than that. But
maybe it's the same time. He's just covering twice the distance.
Probably, yeah. Well, he did it 50. I haven't. That's probably my next milestone, is the 50 miler. That's my next milestone. But yeah, it's this whole world. It's very interesting that you have so many different people with so many different interests and goals, but there's so many different commonalities. in all of us, right? And we all come from different backgrounds, and what gravitates us toward this thing. So one of the last questions here is, what does success mean to you?
I tie success closer to happiness, right? So I've coached some soccer teams, and even what I describe to my kids when they're participating is like, listen, the goal when you go out to participate is to have fun, but also note that there is nothing more fun than winning, right?
Absolutely.
So the goal isn't winning, the goal is fun, right? So you can make sure you can always make sure you have fun. And if you win, you're having even more fun. And so that really is kind of a subtle goal of it. And I think, success is having fun, enjoying what you do. And if that is making money, great, it's making money. If it is having great relationships, and that should be part of it, it's having, I think sometimes you have to be careful about balance, because, great success there, Michael Phelps didn't have much balance as he was pursuing the success of so many gold medals, right? Like he had, no balance, right? It was every focus. He said no to everything else, apparently, except for the bong. So I think that it's you need to be. I think happiness comes from doing the hard things, delivering the value to people, having quality relationships with people, and those are the key things. And if you're doing those, then that is success. I'm very lucky to be in this successful company, because what do I get to do every day? One, I get to be the geeky me and share the science, right? So I absolutely love that. And two, I get to sell to people a product that I didn't create this, right? Like, it was supposed to be toxic, it's supposed to be used in inks, batteries, tires, and photocells. And it turns out to be this amazing supplement that we get these amazing testimonials. So part of my job is I get to read the testimonials. I get to interact with the people who are having amazing experiences. I get to interact with doctors who are like, hey, like, these patients, I couldn't move the HSCRP and your product helped me. Like, I'm lucky to be in this position. I also think luck is the skills you have combined with the opportunities you take, right? So that's what I would say is success. Also, I like to say this: success is really boring, right? A lot of people are like, oh, it's success, and like you're popping champagne bottles or whatever. Think about Michael Phelps, the most successful athlete in history. He swam the same 300 laps 3 times a day, whatever the amount was. And he ate the same 15,000 calories because he was burning so many calories in the pool. He didn't do that for days. He didn't do it for months. He didn't do it for years. He did it for decades. And that is probably what some people would describe as boring. And you've got to figure out how to really have your reward system focused on the long-term goal, and figure out how to kind of get rewards on these short-term kind of boring goals. But at the end of the day, Anthony likes to say it's just not success is not sexy. I actually go to the extreme and say it's actually boring.
Yeah, it's both. Yes, to tie it all in, yes, and
yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
It is both.
Yes, absolutely. Because there's so many days where, I don't feel like writing because I write as well. Or you might not feel like recording. You might not feel like a client call. You might not feel like just going to run again, and do it again. And there's a stage, and I'm sure you know this now, where once you get past those initial beginner gains when you're training, the rate of progress is going to be dramatically slower. So you're not just going to have like every few weeks, I can go look in the mirror and be like, wow, look at this radical change, right? You're going to be like, man, I got like I got like a quarter of an inch on my bicep, or like I lost 1% of fat in 12 weeks. But depending on where you are, that's a huge deal. And so that's why that's going to change. And then once again, that ties back into what you said of like having that long-term reward and making sure that thing is what you actually want.
Yeah.
Because if it's not really, because I think kind of what I'm learning is that if it's really not something that's what you want, it's going to eventually come out eventually, and you're going to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that's okay, right? So maybe you set the goal and you achieve the goal, whatever, if it's a marathon, if it's an Ironman, if it's a 50 miler, and then you're like, yeah, I don't need to ever do that again. Like that can be success. So maybe some of it is like putting challenges in front of you and then accomplishing them to the best of your ability. And sometimes that means, you got 20 miles into your 50 miler and rolled an ankle. But I don't see that as a lack of success, because you're actually out there trying. You're actually doing the hard work. You're doing the boring work to get to that point. And maybe you walk away from that sprained ankle and you're like, I don't need to do that again. I learned the things that I was supposed to learn in this first 20 miles.
Yeah, my first ultra was I caught it crazy cramp. Because my whole nutrition, everything wasn't dialed in like it needed to be. And so I ended up having to walk like a mile or two. And then I was able to kind of run, but still very slow. And I was like, I'm never doing this again. Never doing this again. This is stupid. There's no healthy reason to do this. And 48 hours later, I'm like, I'm going to get back to running and train for something again. And so I just find that like in that moment, you're like, this is the last thing I want to do. And I'm sure you felt like that at times building up a company, where you're like, why the heck am I doing this? This is just so much work. I just feel like quitting. And then there's always something that pulls you back in. And then you get over that hump and you're like, this is why I do it.
I can share, like right now, where the company is, we're, focused on growth. My frustration is like, how do I grow it faster? Like, how do I get this product into more hands? And the frustration is like, okay, what can I do today to make it faster? And sometimes there's not anything you can do today to make it faster tomorrow, right? It's these long-term things that I'm doing that will ultimately make it grow significantly.
Yeah, as my mentor says, planting seeds, and you got to give it time to harvest. Yeah.
Yep.
So I absolutely hate hearing that, because I want it now. But thank you so much for joining me, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. Where can listeners keep up with you?
Well, I absolutely enjoyed this conversation as well. So it was super, super reciprocal. We made a URL for your audience, so they can go to myvitalc.com/EHL, right? Executive Health and Life, EHL. When they land on that page, there will be a coupon code for them that gets them $15 off of their initial order. So you got to go to that URL to get that coupon code. I'll share a couple of things. We have our product in olive oil and avocado oil and MCT oil. My routine is I actually do kind of a bulletproof coffee with MCT in the morning. While that's mixing, I put about 1.5 teaspoons of the MCT in my coffee. While that's mixing, I take 1.5 teaspoons of our olive oil. Our typical recommendation is 1 teaspoon of the olive oil. And we recommend the olive oil for 2 reasons. The first is all that we're a research-based organization. All the research is on the ESS60 molecule in olive oil. And then the next is you have the highest concentration of the ESS60 molecule in olive oil. You got about 0.8 milligrams per milliliter in olive oil, about 0.6 in avocado oil, and then about 0.3 in MCT. I'll also share there's a 25% discount for subscription. Even if you just want to take try the product once, go on subscription. Our customer service team has 1,000 5-star reviews on Google. They're not trained to talk you out of canceling your membership. You can send an email, you can call, you can do whatever you want to do, text, and you can cancel it. Most people don't cancel it, but you certainly have that option. A little bit about the book. I have a charity piece that I'm very proud of. You can get the book Live Longer and Better on the website, on Amazon. You can actually find the book at livelongerandbetterbook.com. And on Amazon, it's $20 on the website. So it's not going to be on that particular EHL landing page, but go to that page, get that coupon code, and then go to the menu structure and find the book. The charity piece is for $10 extra, I'll sign the book for you, and that complete $10 goes to Operation Underground Railroad. You may remember the movie The Sound of Freedom, which is an amazing movie, and about a horrific subject, which is childhood sex trafficking, which we need to obliterate from this planet. That movie is about Operation Underground Railroad. So 100% of the signature fee goes to Operation Underground Railroad. And so very, very proud about that.
Awesome. And I will have all that in the show notes for everyone. And Chris, once again, thank you so much. And for the listeners out there, stay awesome, be limitless, and go optimize today so you can lead tomorrow. Peace.